Suffering in silence in front of screaming fans, some celebs have been through pain the rest of us can't imagine. From actors injured on set to athletes who burned out on the world stage, these stars suffered tragic injuries right before our eyes.
The artist was well known for his amazing live shows, but in his younger years, he really cut loose. Prince often wore high-heeled shoes while performing, and despite his choice of impractical footwear, he often jumped around, causing undue stress to his joints. In the mid-80s, his protege Sheila E. joined him during his Purple Rain tour as an opening act, and later told the press that even back then, Prince was in constant pain. In the years that followed, he was sometimes spotted limping or even riding a motorized scooter to get around while out on tour. He was reportedly using opioids to manage his chronic pain during his later years, and his reliance on drugs got so bad that he turned to addiction specialists to beat his habit mere days before his body was found on April 21st, 2016. Frank Zappa, one of rock's greatest and most prolific eccentrics, suffered from chronic back pain after a bizarre incident during a performance at London's Rainbow Theatre on December 10, 1971. As he and his band began a jokey cover of the Beatles' I Wanna Hold Your Hand, a man in the crowd turned violent, jumping on stage after flying into a rage, then shoved Zappa into the theater's orchestra pit. The man attempted to flee, but was apprehended by members of the crowd. As he later explained, the man wasn't angry that Zappa was mocking one of Britain's most beloved rock groups, but rather that his girlfriend had admitted she had a crush on Zappa. The incident landed Zappa in a wheelchair for almost a year, and reportedly, his crushed larynx caused his voice to drop an octave. Many performers have fallen off stages over the years, but luckily, most escape with nothing more than a bruised ego. Unfortunately, that isn't the case for everyone. Just ask Patti Smith, who teamed up with Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band for a show in Tampa in 1977. Smith was known for her wild performances back then, which often included lots of twirling. But for this show, the stage crew didn't leave her with much space to work with, so she made do with what little room she had. But when her foot hit a stage monitor during the show, she was sent tumbling over the side of the dimly lit stage. Smith fell 15 feet into the orchestra pit, broke vertebrae in her neck, and fractured her spine. She still suffers from neck pain, but as she told the Houston Chronicle in 2012, "It's nothing I can't live with." In 2017, after the second of 4 shows in front of audiences of nearly 100,000 fans at London's Wembley Stadium, Adele realized something wasn't quite right. She had struggled during the first 2 nights and kept having to clear her throat. She saw her doctor, who told her she'd badly damaged her vocal cords and should cancel the last 2 shows at Wembley, which were meant to serve as the finale of her record-setting tour. Sadly, she'd experienced a similar problem when she suffered a hemorrhage after singing live on a French radio show in 2011 and underwent a very risky vocal cord microsurgery. The King of Pop was a legendary performer, but 2 onstage incidents left him long-lasting injuries and pain. In January 1984, while performing on stage at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles for a Pepsi commercial, he was dancing along to his hit single Billie Jean when he got too close to a pyrotechnic display, setting his jacket and hair on fire. Someone ran onto the stage, threw him to the floor, and extinguished the blaze, but not before he sustained 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his face and scalp. He was also left with a series of painful migraines that persisted long after his treatment was completed. Jackson suffered another injury in 1999 after falling over 30 feet while performing Earth Song at a concert in Munich. He was raised into the air on a bridge that then unexpectedly dropped back to the stage. Jackson managed to get back on his feet and finish the show, but he reportedly collapsed backstage afterward. The incident reportedly left him with chronic back pain that often flared up when he was suffering from mental or physical stress. Sid Wilson, the turntablist for Slipknot, was once known for his crazy onstage behavior, which included being set on fire and doing impressive jumps off the stage and other structures. On July 9, 2008, the band was performing at the Rockstar Energy Mayhem Festival in Auburn, Washington, playing their newest single, Psychosocial, for the first time in front of an audience. Wilson jumped off a platform on the back of the stage while wearing a 40-pound costume and landed wrong, shattering both heels. It put him in a wheelchair, but that didn't stop him from continuing to play.
I've been continuing the tour with broken heels.
He continues to have occasional foot trouble though, putting an end to many of his onstage antics. Grabbing drones while they're in mid-flight is dangerous. Spanish heartthrob Enrique Iglesias learned this lesson the hard way when he grabbed one equipped with a camera during a performance in Tijuana, Mexico on May 30th, 2015. It was a big mistake, even though he'd done this during prior shows. That night, his hand got a little too close to the drone's spinning blades. They sliced open one of his palms, fracturing his hand in the process. Iglesias wrapped his hand in a t-shirt and left the stage. He later had reconstructive surgery, but told Univision that he no longer has any feeling in one of his fingers.
There's been a lot of talk in recent years about the prevalence of head injuries in the NFL, but few players ever brought the issue to light during the prime of their career the way Chris Borland did. In just his first year as a linebacker with the San Francisco 49ers in 2014, Borland made a name for himself as a monster on the field. In his second game as a starter, he racked up 18 tackles, including a full-on suplex-style takedown of Rams running back Trey Mason. At the end of the season, however, Borland made the surprise announcement that he was calling it quits. Having suffered his first concussion as a child and then several more later on in life, he wasn't interested in putting himself at any further risk of injury. At the time of his announcement, he had no signs of any neurodegenerative disorder, but he said he had no intention of waiting around until he did. In 2007, Brandon Roy was named NBA Rookie of the Year. He went on to be a three-time All-Star, but only managed 6 seasons in the league before everything fell apart after a long battle with arthritis that left his knees in shambles. In 2011, Roy announced his retirement after enduring serious knee pain for 2 seasons. By the end, he said that he had no cartilage left between the bones in both knees. He underwent 6 surgeries, but the doctors could do nothing more. It was so bad that he was actually at level 3 arthritis. For perspective, level 4 is the last level and would have meant a knee replacement, which would make walking around the house difficult, let alone playing in the NBA. In 2000, Dante Culpepper finished his first season with the Minnesota Vikings with 33 touchdown passes and nearly 4,000 passing yards. After a couple of shaky subsequent years, he hit his stride in 2004 with 4,700 yards and 39 touchdowns. It was a decent showing for the young quarterback and seemed to bode well for the future. But then, in 2005, things took a turn for the worse really quickly. A crushing blow in Week 7 took out Culpepper's knee and tore 3 of his ligaments. He was out for the rest of the season. When he returned in 2006, he threw only 2 touchdown passes and underwent another knee surgery to remove some cartilage that was causing him trouble. By 2009, he was permanently benched by the Lions. He tried to make a comeback with the Sacramento Mountain Lions of the United Football League in 2010, but he was never really able to recover from that knee injury. Defensive tackle Eric LeGrand was a standout in college for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. He racked up 33 tackles in the 2009 season and was off to a strong start the following year. But then, on October 26, 2010, a tackle gone wrong left him with 2 broken vertebrae, rendering him paralyzed. LeGrand needed an immediate 9-hour surgery. Doctors told him he'd never be able to breathe on his own or walk again, and that he'd need a feeding tube for the rest of his life. LeGrand, however, was having none of that. 5 weeks after his injury, he was successfully taken off the ventilator. He has sensation in the upper part of his body now, and though he still can't walk, he believes he absolutely will one day. In 2012, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted LeGrand, a symbolic gesture for a guy whose perseverance and determination are an inspiration.
I don't even see Eric down. I could count the times on one hand that he's been down since this injury happened.
Running back Marcus Lattimore had only just signed with the San Francisco 49ers after skipping the final year of his college career in 2013, when his NFL dreams came to a screeching halt. He racked up a record 38 rushing touchdowns at South Carolina, and his future looked bright. Unfortunately, during the last year of his college career, he suffered an injury that tore every ligament in the right knee and dislocated his kneecap. Just a month and a half later, he declared himself eligible for the NFL draft. The 49ers drafted Lattimore in the 4th round, signing him to a 4-year, $2.5 million contract, much less than he would have gotten had he not been injured. The team expected him to bounce back after surgery. Alas, he spent the entire 2013 season on the bench. He ended up officially retiring from football at age 23, having never played a game in the NFL.
Right after I retired, I thought about, did I make the right decision? Just as any human being would.
In 2014, wrestler Corey Graves was poised to be huge. He had the 2 things that you need to be a star in the industry: the physical prowess and the engaging personality. Lots of wrestlers have the first one, but not many can really pull off the second. But Graves definitely had a bankable persona. Unfortunately, it was the physical side that did him in. A second concussion in the span of about 6 months took Graves permanently out of the ring. He thought his career was done for good. Luckily for Graves, it wasn't completely over. He's remained nearby, as the personality that served him so well has given him a second life as a ringside announcer. On December 4, 1988, Gary Busey was thrown from his motorcycle while joyriding in West Hollywood. The actor was not wearing a helmet and he was swiftly rushed to the hospital, where he claims he died briefly while undergoing emergency surgery.
Split my skull up to here, knocked a hole in it that big.
Thankfully, he found a way back to the side and has continued his career in the decades since. The accident was a life-changing moment for a couple of reasons. First, the resulting head injuries meant he had to relearn how to walk and speak again. When asked how he feels about the experience now, Busey told The Guardian, "I have a brain disordered in a better direction because of how it happened and how it recovered." In 1990, Latin American singer Gloria Estefan was on top of the world following a string of 80s hits. But in March of that year, the singer was involved in a horrific crash when a semi-truck slipped on a wintry Pennsylvania highway and slammed into her tour bus.
I open my eyes and I'm on the floor of the bus. And I am looking around and it is mayhem.
Recovery was brutal. Estefan was in a wheelchair for a good bit afterward, recovering from a broken back, but she claims it changed her life for the better. Before the accident, she didn't take her spirituality too seriously. She told people, "There was definitely a before and after from that accident. Maybe this is the reason that I've gone through this. Maybe I can be an example to people of how to take control of our lives and get past hurdles." In 1994, Poison frontman Bret Michaels slammed his Ferrari into a telephone pole, breaking several bones. He'd been bar hopping before getting behind the wheel, and he told the Houston Press that he'd been driving fast and lost control of his car. The incident was a sobering experience for Michaels, who said, "I still look at the photos sometimes, and I look at that car bent back over itself where my head went through the windshield. Like, man, it is amazing I'm alive. I broke my ribs, my nose was on the other side of my head, you know. Split my head. It's weird when you find your own teeth in the floorboard of the car." He recovered in time to reach reality TV glory with Rock of Love with Bret Michaels. For millions of people around the world, Christopher Reeve was Superman. He starred in the critically acclaimed movie in 1978, which got rave reviews from critics. He reprised the role several times before hanging up the cape and boots after 1987's Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. By the 1990s, Reeve was looking for new opportunities to showcase his talent and deepen his filmography with more serious work. But fate had other plans. On May 27, 1995, Reeve was thrown from a horse he'd been riding on and tragically paralyzed from the neck down after shattering 2 bones in his spine. It was initially unclear if he would survive. His website says his injuries were so serious that his own mother even discussed pulling him off of life support with his medical team to alleviate his suffering. Reeve did eventually pull through, but his career in Hollywood was all but over, and he would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair, unable to even turn his head. It was a horrifying turn of events for an actor barely 42 years old, looking forward to a new phase in his career. But Reeve turned the tragedy into something positive. He formed the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation for Victims of Paralysis alongside his wife, who stayed by his side through what recovery there was.
And any one of us could get hurt at any moment.
These days, you either know Kanye Ye West because of his music or the endless controversies. But as the Netflix documentary Genius, a Kanye trilogy, points out, he almost never got the opportunity to accomplish anything. That's because in 2002, he fell asleep at the wheel and crashed violently into an oncoming vehicle. The other driver broke both legs, and West's jaw was broken in 3 places, necessitating emergency surgery, metal plates, and having his jaw wired shut for weeks. He told MTV months later, "I had nasal fractures. I'd be talking to people and my nose would start bleeding. Even to this day, I could start choking because spit will go down the wrong path. That whole area is messed up." Weirdly, West has since claimed that the accident helped his career. In a 2014 sit-down with Interview magazine, he said, "The accident gave me the opportunity to do what I really wanted to do. I was a music producer and everyone was telling me that I had no business becoming a rapper, so it gave me the opportunity to tell everyone, hey, I need some time to recover. But during that recovery period, I just spent all my time honing my craft and making the college dropout."
I looked at this accident as God saying, "I'm about to hand you the world."
That album, released in 2004, would win the Grammy for Best Rap Album. Sometimes actors risk life and limb by waiving their right to a stunt double. Just ask Charlize Theron, who did her own stunts for 2005's Aeon Flux. While shooting a fight scene, she misstepped attempting to perform some acrobatics in platform shoes and landed hard on her neck. Filming was halted for weeks while she recovered from an injury that was almost much worse. She later told News.com, "I was a centimeter away from being completely paralyzed for the rest of my life. It was nobody's fault, but it was just a freak accident where I landed on my neck." Although she recovered, she dealt with chronic pain for years. Luckily, the worst of it appears to be behind her. In August 2021, Blink-182 drummer Travis Barker got on a plane with his now wife Kourtney Kardashian. doesn't sound like a very big deal. After all, a world-famous and very in-demand musician has to tour, right? Thing is, getting on an aircraft was something of a triumph for Barker, who'd avoided planes for years following a terrifying and deadly plane crash in 2008. According to CBS, underinflated tires caused a Learjet 60 plane carrying Barker and several other passengers to crash on the runway while attempting to take off. The plane burst into flames, killing several passengers and wounding Barker.
It caught fire. We were in there, and then we came down, in the air, came down, and then finally we hit an embankment.
The following year, people said Barker's good friend and fellow passenger Adam Goldstein, more commonly known as DJ AM, died in New York. Since Goldstein was the only other person to make it off that plane, that leaves Barker as the sole living survivor of the crash. Near-death experiences aren't something people get over very easily. In 2014, 30 rock star Tracy Morgan was involved in a fiery, lethal car accident involving multiple vehicles. The wreck killed his longtime friend and mentor, 62-year-old Uncle Jimmy Mack, and sent Morgan to the hospital in critical condition. According to news media, the accident occurred when a Walmart truck smashed into a limousine Morgan was in on the New Jersey Turnpike. For 5 months, Morgan was largely bedridden and confined to a wheelchair when he wasn't. He later told Rolling Stone, "I was in a very dark place. I was sitting right here contemplating suicide. I couldn't walk." On the Today Show, he said that he initially didn't remember the ordeal, but that hospital staff kept him informed as he recovered in those first days after the accident, saying, "It was surreal. They remember everything. I had traumatic brain damage, so I don't remember anything, and they would tell me everything that happened."
When I first came out to the coma, I was a mess.
When the memories flooded back, it was traumatic, he said, adding, "I got to the bed that I recovered in, and I just dropped to my knees and started crying because everything came before my face. Jimmy Mack, the truck, my friends that was in the car with me, all of that stuff came right before me." Harrison Ford doesn't just pretend to know his way around planes and spaceships in the movies. The star has been flying for years.
You know how to fly, don't you?
No. Do you?
And he's not just flying recreationally either. The article says he's flown real-life wilderness rescues that have saved lives. But in 2015, he was the one in need of help. The Associated Press says that the then 72-year-old A-lister was injured after crash landing on a California golf course. But it wasn't incompetence that caused the wreck. Quite the opposite, actually. Witnesses and aviation vets commended Ford for landing in open ground, even roughly, rather than trying to limp his dying aircraft back to the runway and risk crashing into a populated area. One witness said, "Another 25 to 30 yards and I don't want to think about it. He saved several lives."
You ever have a flying dream? I have.
AP said his condition was fair to moderate as he was taken to the hospital. But although he recovered fully, he may have been in worse shape than he initially let on. Ford recalled his injuries to Ellen: a dislocated right ankle, a shattered pelvis, and a broken back, and a serious bump on the head, and a major laceration. Some people are just born lucky. When you see just how many times Justin Theroux has escaped death, you'll get what we mean. On an episode of Ellen, Justin Theroux talked about his many injuries while filming The Leftovers, saying, "I went to the emergency room every single season of the show." In another episode, he describes a scooter accident, saying, "I realize as I'm coming up on the next street that there's no lockup. There's still actual cars going back and forth." He slammed on the brakes and flew sideways off the bike, smashing his head on the ground. And that wasn't even the worst thing he went through. On yet another Ellen episode, he describes an earlier incident where he got creamed by a van while skateboarding and woke up with amnesia. He told Ellen, "I woke up with people all around me. I clearly blanked out for, I think, a long time. I had no clue who I was. I mean, I knew that I was me, but I couldn't remember my name and I couldn't remember my phone number." Luckily, it wore off and he recovered fully. Actress and model Brooke Shields was just trying to stay in shape when she tumbled off a balance board and instantly knew something was wrong. She told People, "It felt like it was all in slow motion, and then I just started screaming. Sound came out of me that I've never heard before." She had a broken femur, and she said she was genuinely afraid she was paralyzed and would never walk again. In the hospital, Shields got 2 metal rods in her leg, but then her injured bone popped out again, necessitating a second surgery involving 5 more rods and a metal plate to hold everything in place.
I realize what a fighter I am.
On February 21st, 2021, Shields posted a video to Instagram of herself walking slowly in a hospital gown with the use of crutches. The caption read, "Broke my femur, beginning to mend. No matter what your challenge is, make a positive choice for yourself to move forward." While you might not think of The Exorcist as much of an action spectacular, it did have a few moments that required some minor stunt work. In one scene, Ellen Burstyn's character Chris is thrown to the floor by her daughter Reagan, who is played by Linda Blair. In another, Blair was meant to thrash up and down on her bed. Both actors ended up with permanent injuries from these stunts. For Burstyn, the scene was relatively simple. During one of Reagan's demonic outbursts, Chris is supposed to be thrown to the floor. To achieve this effect, the filmmakers tied her to a harness and yanked her to the ground, simulating the force of the demon. After the first take, she mentioned to director William Friedkin that the operator had pulled the harness too hard, but on the second take, she was pulled down even harder and shattered her tailbone as a result. Meanwhile, Blair's thrashing was accomplished by tying her to a mechanism using a special corset, which could fling her up at a right angle, then back down again. In one take, however, the corset came loose, and Blair repeatedly slammed her back into the mechanism, fracturing her lower spine. To make things even more uncomfortable, Friedkin used both takes in the final movie. Both characters' screams of pain are very much real.
I couldn't stand that he was willing to just get a quick shot of it before they called the ambulance,
In 1981, Noel Marshall released Roar, a film about big cats that has since become remembered as one of the most disastrous film productions of all time. The cast and crew suffered so many injuries from the film's animals that it's actually not clear how many people ended up getting hurt. During filming, Tippi Hedren suffered multiple scalp wounds and a shattered leg, while Melanie Griffith was mauled, nearly costing her an eye and required facial reconstruction. And those weren't even the worst injuries, as a cinematographer was nearly scalped by a lion, and Marshall himself ended up getting gangrene from his numerous animal wounds.
He's crazy. He was crazy.
The problem was that the animals were entirely untrained, and all of the scenes with them were improvised. They were all the property of Marshall and Hedren, and there was no on-set trainer. The film was shot on Marshall and Hedren's own ranch, and this was before most modern safety requirements. Of course, it must have hurt all the more when, after literally shedding blood for the camera, Roar completely tanked at the box office. You might not know who Charles McGraw is, but you've probably seen his movies. As a character actor, McGraw made appearances in all sorts of films, but the most famous was 1960's Spartacus. In this classic movie, McGraw plays Marcellus, Spartacus's gladiator trainer and a minor villain, who has his comeuppance when Spartacus drowns him in a pot of soup during a slave revolt. It was during the filming of the soup scene that McGraw ended up seriously injured. Kirk Douglas, who played Spartacus, was meant to force McGraw's head into the soup, but the actor slipped. McGraw's jaw ended up hitting the side of the soup pot, which of course was an actual iron cauldron. The shot is in the final film, and if you watch it carefully, you can see the moment of impact itself, and a somewhat dazed expression on McGraw's face, which is real because Douglas had just shattered McGraw's jaw. That wasn't the end of it, though. Douglas blamed McGraw for the accident, which angered stuntman Louis Elias. Elias then stepped in to do a take of the scene, but ended up also hitting his face on the pot, and ended up needing 4 stitches on his chin. Elias claimed that it was his own fault for slipping, but it's hard to rule out the possibility that Kirk Douglas just liked smacking people in the face. In 2001's Castaway, Tom Hanks really lost 50 pounds to portray Chuck Nolan, a FedEx logistics officer who ends up stranded on a deserted island. Amazingly, Hanks is able to carry the movie almost entirely by himself, but the real surprise is that one minor injury on set nearly killed him. During filming, Hanks suffered a small cut on his leg. Nothing major, and Hanks basically shrugged it off. But 2 weeks later, the wound was still there and still very sore. Deciding that it was time to get it checked out, Hanks saw a doctor who told him something shocking. He was about to die. The cut had a staph infection, and it was getting worse by the minute. Hanks had been completely unaware that his own blood was turning into poison inside of him and passing the infection throughout his body. Now, if this had happened to a FedEx employee on a deserted island, he'd be in big trouble. In fact, it's not uncommon for survivors to have to battle infections while awaiting rescue. Obviously, however, Tom Hanks has movie star health insurance, so he spent a few days in the hospital and thankfully recovered just fine. After 6 seasons of confusing twists and turns, Lost finally had its series finale on May 25, 2010, with a 2-parter simply titled The End. The episode features Matthew Fox's character Jack Shephard facing down the Man in Black, played by Terry O'Quinn, in a cliffside knife fight as the island crumbles around them. But production on the show very nearly ended in tragedy. In an episode of his podcast dedicated to The End, Jorge Garcia describes how during the episode's filming, Fox was supposed to be stabbed by O'Quinn with a collapsible prop knife. Since this was a pretty low-risk scene, originally the production wasn't going to force Fox to wear any sort of pad, but the stunt coordinator stepped in at the last second. The only pad they could find that would fit under Fox's shirt without being too obvious was a piece of Kevlar. This ended up saving Matthew Fox's life because a prop mix-up caused the collapsible knife to be swapped for the real one. O'Quinn stabbed Fox for real, but he only suffered minor injuries thanks to the Kevlar. If he had gone without the pad as planned, or if they had used any other pad, he would have been very seriously injured or even killed. In 2004, Mel Gibson directed The Passion of the Christ, an R-rated depiction of the suffering Jesus is said to have endured at the hands of the Romans during his execution. In an era that saw the release of Hollywood's goriest horror movies, Gibson's dark and gritty crucifixion story stood its own ground in terms of sheer violence. Star Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus, also suffered quite a bit during filming. A weird cavalcade of injuries befell him on set, more than one of which could have easily killed him. For example, the film shows Jesus carrying his own cross while being whipped by Roman soldiers. One of the extras in these scenes accidentally whipped Caviezel for real, leaving a 14-inch gash on his back. The cross prop itself also weighed 150 pounds and fell on Caviezel at one point, sending him face down in the sand and causing him to badly bite his own tongue. The shot is included in the film, and the blood pouring from his mouth is totally real.
The man put a stethoscope on my heart, and he said, "Mel, he can die."
On top of being nearly crushed and whipped, during the filming of Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount, Caviezel was struck by lightning, which, as far as signs from God go, really can't be good news. Brandon Lee, son of martial artist and actor Bruce Lee, once had a promising acting career ahead of him. Most notably, he had just scored his first major leading role playing Eric Draven in an adaptation of James O'Barr's underground comic series The Crow. The film was already shaping up to be the ultimate goth film, full of melodrama, black costumes, and a soundtrack packed with industrial and metal bangers. But the film took on an even darker tone after March 31, 1993, when Lee was accidentally shot and killed on the movie's set. During filming of a scene where Lee's character is shot, things appeared to go off without a hitch. The gun, loaded with blanks, went off and Lee hit the floor. Soon, though, crew members noticed blood pooling around Lee's side. He was rushed to the hospital but died hours later. The production later pieced together what happened. In a previous scene, the crew had filmed a close-up of the prop gun being loaded. Dummy bullets were loaded into the gun for this scene, then removed and replaced with blanks for the next scene, where the gun would be fired. Unnoticed by the props department, though, was a piece of the dummy bullet lodged in the gun. When the dummy bullet fragment and blank combined, this effectively made a live round, which was what ended up killing Lee. In 1982, directors Steven Spielberg and John Landis began working on a film based on the 1960s television series The Twilight Zone. The film would be an anthology, remaking 4 episodes from the show, each with a different director. Spielberg and Landis took one each, and directors Joe Dante and George Miller made 2 others. Landis chose a segment called Time Out, an original story loosely based on multiple episodes of the show. In the segment, actor Vic Morrow plays a racist named Bill Connor who changes his ways after traveling back in time and experiencing famous moments of oppression from the perspective of the victims. This includes a scene during the Vietnam War in which Connor is shot at by American soldiers. In the final movie, Connor is attacked alone and escapes alone, but in the original script, he was meant to rescue 2 Vietnamese children as well. These children were Mika Den Lay and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, and both were non-actors who had been hired illegally. In a scene where Morrow carries them both across a river, a low-flying helicopter was meant to swoop overhead with explosives going off nearby. Those explosions brought down the helicopter, which crashed on top of Morrow and the 2 children, killing all 3. Landis and several other members of the crew were accused of negligence and brought to trial, but were all eventually acquitted. 2005 Syriana gave George Clooney an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor and a spot on many critics' top 10 list, but it also got him something far more dangerous, a pretty serious brain injury. During a scene in which Clooney is tied to a chair, the chair was accidentally knocked over backward with Clooney still tied to it. He hit his head on the hard ground but thought he was okay, so he took it easy for a bit and then went back to work. But over the next several months, Clooney began suffering from horrifyingly painful headaches. Because he had a family history of painkiller addiction, he didn't take any sort of pain-relieving drugs. But the headaches were so bad that he has since revealed that he contemplated taking his own life just to get away from the intense pain. Clooney kept returning to the doctor over and over until they finally figured it out. During the fall, he had ruptured a sac called the dura mater, a membrane that stretches from the spine into the brain. The headaches and associated pains had manifested because his brain wasn't floating in the fluid like it was supposed to, but instead smacked into his skull, bruising it badly.